For our anniversary, I wrote him a letter with everything I loved about him. He smiled, said, "Thanks," and never gave me anything back. That night, I cried in the bathroom while he played video games. 3 weeks later, he got a letter too. But it wasn't from me. I didn't want to buy him a gift. Not this year. We'd done that before, exchanged things we didn't need, wrapped up in shiny bags, forced smiles, and thank yous that felt routine. A watch he never wore. A sweater that I folded back into the closet the next day. Cards with pre-printed messages that barely scratched the surface. I wanted something different this time, something honest, something real, so I wrote him a letter. 4 pages, front and back, folded carefully. No envelope because it felt more personal that way, just paper, my words, and the truth. It wasn't dramatic, it wasn't poetic, just me, writing everything I loved about him. The way he tucked his left hand behind his back when he was nervous. The way he used to make breakfast with music playing in the background, always dancing badly to it. How he once stayed up with me when I had the flu, holding my hair back and rubbing circles on my back until I could sleep. Little things, the kind of things that go unnoticed when a relationship gets too quiet, too routine. It was our 3rd anniversary. Not a milestone, but still something that mattered to me. That deserved recognition, reflection, and love. So I sat at the kitchen table 3 nights before, writing in the quiet. I cried while writing it, not out of sadness, but something softer. A mix of hope and fear. Because we hadn't been doing well, not for a while. There were days he barely looked up from his phone. Nights he fell asleep before I'd even gotten into bed. Conversations that used to last hours now lived in short sentences and empty nods. Still, I thought maybe the letter would pull us back into something warmer. Maybe it would remind him of the way we used to be. We made dinner reservations. He didn't ask where I wanted to go, just picked a spot. A steakhouse. Loud, dark, and expensive. It wasn't really my vibe, but I said okay. I wore a dress he once complimented a year ago and hoped he'd remember. He didn't. We sat down at the table and ordered wine. He scrolled through his phone until the drinks arrived. I tried not to feel the weight of that. Halfway through dinner, I reached into my purse and handed him the letter. "I didn't get you a gift," I said, "but I wrote you something." He raised an eyebrow, like a poem. I smiled, a little embarrassed. "Just a letter." He unfolded it, skimmed it, if that's what I'll call it. I watched his eyes move across the page like he was reading a receipt. Then he looked up. "Thanks," he said, just that. No follow-up, no questions. No smile that reached his eyes. He slid the pages back onto the table, folded them haphazardly, and set them near his water glass like a napkin he didn't need anymore. And then, he picked up his phone. Scrolled. I sat across from him, my fork still in my hand, my heart still wide open, and just nodded. Pretended it was fine. Pretended that thanks was enough. We finished dinner, barely talked. He asked if I wanted dessert, and I said no. I wasn't hungry anymore. The letter stayed on the table for the rest of the meal. He didn't touch it again. On the way home, he talked about work. About how his coworker kept messing up the shared files and how the team group chat was full of idiots. I said nothing. I didn't want to talk about work. I didn't want to talk about anything. I just stared out the window and let him ramble. When we got home, he took off his shoes in the hallway, kicked them toward the door. He tossed his keys on the table, changed into sweatpants, and went straight to the couch. Console on. Headphones in. Within 5 minutes, he was yelling at his teammates. Laughing. Swearing. Alive in a way I hadn't seen all night. I stood there in the hallway, heels still on, makeup starting to crack beneath my eyes, and I waited. For him to look over his shoulder. To say something. To ask if I was okay. If I wanted to talk. If he'd read the letter again, really read it. He didn't. He turned the volume up and called out, "Don't wait up, I'm playing late." And that was it. That was our anniversary. 4 pages of everything I'd ever loved about him, and all I got was thanks. It should have made me angry, but it didn't. Not then, it just made me tired. Because love shouldn't feel like this much work with so little return. That night, I stood in the bathroom and stared at myself in the mirror for a long time. I didn't look sad, I looked distant. Numb, I peeled off my dress, took off my earrings, unpinned my hair. And as I washed my face, I realized something I hadn't wanted to admit. The man I wrote that letter for, He wasn't here anymore. Maybe he hadn't been for a long time. After I wiped off my makeup and slipped into my pajamas, I sat on the edge of the bathtub and listened. Not to my own thoughts. I'd heard those all day. I listened to him. His voice floated in from the living room, loud, animated, full of life I hadn't seen directed at me in weeks. Maybe months. He was talking to his friends online, deep in whatever mission or match had sucked him in that night. Dude, that was clean. Who's got ammo? Hold up, my girl's moving around. Okay, we're good. I stared at the closed bathroom door. That was me, the girl who moved around, a background noise in her own home. He hadn't asked how I felt about dinner. Hadn't mentioned the letter again. It was like it never happened. 4 pages, handwritten, folded carefully and handed over with the quiet hope that it would matter. And it had been digested in less than a minute, then forgotten like a side dish he didn't order. I ran the faucet just to have a sound of my own. Let the water splash into the sink like something was moving inside me, even if it was only plumbing. I didn't sob. Not the dramatic kind, anyway. It was the slow unraveling. Tears that slipped down without warning. The kind that come when your body knows before your mind will admit it. Something is wrong and it's not going to fix itself. It wasn't about the letter. Not really. It was what it represented. What it confirmed. That I was in a relationship where I was writing love letters to someone who couldn't even look me in the eye long enough to read them. That I was hoping and showing up and softening, and he was numbing, escaping, vanishing in real time. I crouched down on the bathroom floor. The tile was cold, but I didn't move. It anchored me. I thought about all the small moments I'd excused, the missed calls, the "I'm just tired," the "I'll make it up to you," the way he never took photos of us anymore, the way he pulled away from kisses but said, "I'm just not in the mood," like that was something I should always understand. He hadn't cheated, I told myself. He wasn't abusive, but he was absent. And there's a grief in being with someone who's still physically next to you, but emotionally gone. I used to believe the worst kind of heartbreak was being left, but it's not. The worst kind of heartbreak is staying. Staying long enough to watch someone unlearn how to love you. Staying while you shrink yourself to fit the silence. Staying because you're afraid that leaving will hurt, but slowly realizing staying already does. I wiped my face with the sleeve of my shirt and looked at myself in the mirror. I didn't even look like me anymore. There was no sparkle, no softness. Just someone tired of hoping, tired of waiting, tired of explaining to herself why bare minimums should still count. I stepped out of the bathroom and peeked around the corner. He was still playing. Headset on, feet up. He glanced at me briefly, then back at the screen. "Everything okay?" he asked, not pausing the game. "Yeah," I said, lying. He nodded. "Cool, love you." I wanted to believe it, but it felt automatic. Like he didn't say it because he felt it, but because it was easier than asking what was actually wrong. I didn't answer. I just walked past him. He didn't notice. I crawled into bed alone. Not for the first time. The space between us in that bed used to be filled with tangled legs and late-night conversations. Now, it felt like a canyon. He came to bed 2 hours later. I was half asleep, but awake enough to hear him sigh, toss his phone on the nightstand, and turn away from me. No kiss goodnight. No thanks again for the letter. Just silence, the kind that stretches, the kind that doesn't need shouting to be loud. And as I lay there, eyes wide open in the dark, I realized something else. I was done asking for less than I gave. I was done mistaking his comfort for commitment. I was done crying alone while he escaped into his games, and his phone and whatever version of reality didn't include the woman still fighting for him in the next room. The letter was the last time I'd try to remind him of what we had. From here on out, I'd remind myself of what I deserved. I didn't leave right away, not after the letter, not after the dinner, not after the quiet cry on the bathroom floor. I still woke up next to him the next morning, still made coffee for 2, still asked if he wanted eggs or just toast, still folded his laundry and placed his socks neatly in the top drawer, but something had shifted. Not in a dramatic way, more like a tide that turns so slowly you don't notice until your feet are already standing in dry sand. It was the kind of shift you don't announce, not even to yourself. I just stopped expecting things. I stopped hoping he'd reach for me in bed. Stopped waiting for him to ask how my day was. Stopped wondering if he noticed when I got quiet or pulled away. Because the answer was always the same, he didn't, so I started small. One morning while he was at work, I opened my closet and pulled out the travel duffel I used to use when we visited his parents. It still smelled like lavender dryer sheets and airport anxiety. I placed it on the bed and slowly filled it with things that were mine. Not the shared things, not the things we bought together, just the ones that reminded me of who I was before him. My favorite sweatshirt. The pink one with the frayed sleeve that I stopped wearing because he said it made me look like a college kid. My worn-out copy of Jane Eyre, pages falling apart at the spine. The photos I took in Paris before we met. The ones I never hung because he said they made the apartment feel too much like a girl's place. I packed in silence. Not because I was scared he'd find out, but because it felt sacred, like mourning the life I was leaving behind before it even ended. By the third day, I had a box filled with my old journals, my skincare products, and the ceramic jewelry tray my sister gave me last Christmas. Still, I didn't say a word. Every night, we'd sit on opposite ends of the couch. He'd game or scroll. I'd pretend to read. The space between us wasn't hostile, just numb. He didn't notice the gaps on the bookshelf, the missing coffee mug, the fact that my favorite earrings no longer lived in the bowl by the sink. And then one evening, he left his tablet on the kitchen counter. I wasn't snooping, not really. I just needed a timer for the pasta. When I turned on the screen, it opened directly to his messages. I froze. There it was. A conversation with someone named Ashley. Not deep, not overtly inappropriate, but flirtatious enough to feel like a bruise. The kind of flirting that's casual on the surface but sharp underneath. Little jokes, inside references. Emojis I hadn't seen in our chats in over a year. One message caught my eye. Don't tell my girl, lol. That one burned. Not because it confirmed anything I didn't already feel, but because it confirmed he knew exactly what he was doing. He didn't trip into emotional distance. He created it. He chose it. He just kept me around long enough to keep the house warm. I set the tablet down, walked into the bedroom, folded another shirt, then another. Then a pair of jeans I hadn't worn in months because he said they didn't hug me right. That night, I didn't say a word. He kissed my cheek when he got home. I let him. He asked what I made for dinner. I said pasta. He didn't ask how I was. He never did. We sat. Ate. Watched a show I wasn't following anymore. He laughed. I didn't. When he went to bed early, tired from what I didn't know, I stayed up and labeled 3 boxes. Bedroom, bathroom, books. It felt like preparing for an emergency evacuation. Only this time, the emergency was already over. I just hadn't walked out of the building yet. There wasn't going to be a fight. No yelling, no slammed doors, no crying in the hallway. I didn't want drama, I just wanted peace. And I was finally willing to leave to find it. 3 weeks passed. And in that time, I became a quiet ghost inside my own home. I still lived there, but I had already left. Every day, I moved a little more of myself out. A pair of shoes under the bed. A half-used perfume bottle from the bathroom shelf. Books. Photos. Memories. He didn't notice. Or maybe he did and just didn't want to know. Either way, he said nothing. And neither did I. We existed in the same rooms, but miles apart. We made eye contact less than we spoke, which wasn't saying much. He still gamed most nights. I still stared at my laptop with tabs open I had no intention of reading. The thing is, when you stop being surprised by someone's absence, that's when you know it's over. I had stopped being surprised a long time ago. I told myself I'd stay until the end of the month. It was easier that way. Fewer questions, cleaner bills, one less confrontation. But then came the letter. It arrived on a Tuesday afternoon. I was in the kitchen microwaving leftovers when I heard the mail slot creak and a soft thud hit the floor. I didn't rush to check it. I never did. But when I passed through the hallway, I saw the envelope on the mat. Thick, official, plain white, his name typed neatly across the front. I placed it on the table and went back to my food. 15 minutes later, he came through the door, dropped his backpack, toed off his shoes, kissed my head out of habit, not affection. He spotted the letter and picked it up. He opened it without thinking, and then everything stopped. I watched him read it once, then again, slower. His lips moved slightly as he took in the words, trying to make sense of them, as if reading them aloud would make them less true. He sat down on the edge of the couch. His hands trembled. "What is it?" I asked, already knowing. He held it up like it physically hurt him to say it. "They laid me off." I didn't say anything. He looked at me like I was supposed to fall apart for him, cry with him, tell him everything would be okay. Like I was supposed to carry him now, the way I had carried the weight of our silence for months. But all I felt was empty, not cruel, just done. He blinked at me, searching for some part of me that would rise to meet his panic. He didn't find it. "I don't know what to do," he said, voice cracking. And I said the only thing that came to mind. "Okay." He flinched. "Okay," he repeated. "Yes," I said, "okay." Not sarcastic, not cold, just flat, honest, because what else was there to say? 3 weeks ago, I had given him a letter too. 4 pages, folded neatly, full of everything I still loved about him. Everything I hoped we could find again. Everything I poured out of myself, hoping he'd hold it gently. He read it in under a minute, said thanks, and never mentioned it again. He gave me nothing back, so no, I wasn't going to cry over this letter. It wasn't mine to carry. He stood there, stunned, waiting. But I was done performing love for someone who couldn't be bothered to look up. I walked into the bedroom, pulled out the last box I had been packing, and carried it into the living room. He stared at it. "What are you doing?" I didn't answer right away. I reached into my pocket, pulled out the spare key I'd been holding on to, and placed it on the table beside his letter. Then I looked him in the eye, really looked at him, and said, "You're not the only one who got something delivered today." He furrowed his brow, confused. I didn't explain, because the truth was, my delivery wasn't on paper. It wasn't a pink slip. It wasn't a warning. It was the final piece of myself I had needed to collect before walking away. I watched him shrink into the couch, letter still in his hand, confusion morphing into fear. And for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel small. I didn't feel invisible. I felt clear. Like a window had opened inside me and the air finally moved again. He got his letter, but it wasn't from me, and mine. He'd had it 3 weeks ago. He just didn't care enough to read it like it mattered. He was still sitting on the couch, letter in hand, mouth slightly open, legs unmoving, like if he didn't shift, maybe the truth wouldn't fully land. "I lost my job," he said again. This time softer, like repetition would make it less real. Like maybe saying it out loud was him asking me to fix it. He looked up at me, waiting, and I knew that look. I had seen it before. When he got a parking ticket, he didn't want to pay. When he forgot to pick up something I'd asked for. When he got too comfortable and too lazy and expected me to smooth things over because that's what I always did. He was waiting for the rescue, waiting for me to reach for him to say, "It's okay, we'll get through this." But I didn't move. I didn't reach, I didn't even flinch. I said, "Okay." Flat, unemotional, certain. And just like that, something broke not in me but in him. I could see it. He blinked twice. His mouth opened and closed. He squinted like maybe he misheard. "Wait, okay?" he asked. "Yes. Just okay." "What else is there to say?" I replied. He stared at me, confusion giving way to fear. A fear that should have arrived months ago but was only now beginning to catch up with him. For a long time, he had been careless with me, careless with my time, my words, my effort. He had tested how far I would stretch without snapping. And I had stretched farther than I ever should have. He didn't think I'd ever reach the end. But there I was. I walked back into the bedroom and grabbed the tape roll. I started sealing the last box. He stood in the doorway, arms limp by his sides. "What are you doing?" "I'm leaving." "Wait, because of the job." I looked at him like I didn't recognize him, and in that moment I really didn't. "No, not because of the job," I said. "Because of everything else." He looked stunned, but I didn't have it in me to explain. Not again. Not after all the times I'd hinted, nudged, whispered my needs like prayers hoping they'd reach him. I had said it all before, just in quieter ways. Softer ways, in letters, in late-night looks, in the weight of my silence. I was done repeating myself. He stood there for a second longer, then walked back to the living room. I carried one box out, then another. He watched, but didn't stop me. I could see the wheels turning, not with guilt or reflection, but disbelief, that this was happening. That I was the one walking out when, in his mind, I'd never leave. Because he thought I was the kind of girl who stayed. The kind of girl who forgave and waited and hoped and tried harder when things got harder. And for a long time, he was right. Until he wasn't. I taped the last box closed and set it near the door. He cleared his throat. "You're really doing this?" I nodded. And then, after a pause, I said, "You know, when I gave you that letter on our anniversary, I wasn't asking for anything back. I didn't need flowers or a gift. I just needed you to see me, really see me. But you didn't, and now." I shrugged. Now I see myself. He didn't respond. What could he say? Nothing he said would have mattered anymore. I picked up my keys. Not the one to the apartment, that one I'd already left on the table, but my car keys, the ones I still held like they meant escape. I opened the door, and he said the thing cowards always say when it's too late. "Can we talk?" I didn't turn around. "We've had years to talk," I said. "You just kept turning the volume up on everything else." I stepped out and closed the door behind me. When I finally walked out that door, I didn't expect him to chase me. But some small part of me had hoped he would at least stand in the threshold. That he'd say my name, not out of desperation, but recognition. That he'd look at me and see, truly see, what he was losing. But he didn't. He stood there in the living room, holding his layoff letter like it could explain the emptiness around him, like it might somehow justify what he had done to me. I carried my last box to the car, popped the trunk, set it in place beside the others. There were 7 in total. 7 quiet boxes filled with all the pieces of me I had brought into that relationship. Pieces I had started gathering long before he realized anything was missing. The building was still, the air was thick. That kind of heavy silence that falls over a place after something important leaves. I got in the car. My hands were shaking, but not from fear. They were shaking because this was it, not a fight. Not a blowout, not a tragic goodbye, just a final, decisive move. He didn't even come to the window, didn't call, didn't text. Because for him, I had already become invisible long before I physically left. And that's what hurt most. Not that he let me go, but that he never even noticed I was going. He thought I would stay, because I had always stayed. After the forgotten birthdays, the half-hearted apologies, the way he pulled away from my hand in public and said he wasn't into PDA, even though he used to be. The way he said, "love you," like a reflex instead of a truth. I had stayed through all of that. So he assumed I always would. But here's the thing, women like me don't leave in storms, we leave in silence. We leave after the last straw has already broken and we've stitched ourselves back up in private. We leave when the crying is done, when the grieving has settled, when we've already imagined our life without them and realized it's lighter. When I got home, to my new home, the tiny studio I'd found 2 neighborhoods away, I didn't unpack immediately. I sat on the floor surrounded by boxes and just let the silence wash over me. It felt peaceful. There was no controller clicking in the background, no headset yelling, no one scrolling beside me, more invested in his phone than the woman sitting 2 feet away. Just me, just breath. I took out my journal and opened to a blank page. I didn't write much, just a few words. He didn't even notice I was leaving, but I did, and that's why I'm free. The days that followed were quiet in a different way. No texts, no missed calls, no long-winded apologies. He didn't reach out, and I didn't go looking. Maybe his pride wouldn't let him. Or maybe, just maybe, he knew that even if he tried, there was nothing left for him to return to. I found out later through a mutual friend that he was struggling with the job loss. That he was shocked I had left, that he didn't see it coming. That part almost made me laugh. Because how do you miss a woman slowly packing her heart away? How do you live with someone and not notice that their laughter has stopped echoing, that their toothbrush is gone, that the photo frames are emptier by the day? But then again, that's who he was. Not cruel, just careless. There's a difference. And carelessness cuts in a way that's harder to heal from because it doesn't come with sharp edges. It comes with a dull ache, a slow erosion. It makes you question if you were ever really seen. And the truth is, I wasn't. Not by the man who used to tell me I was too sensitive when I tried to express how invisible I felt. Not by the man who told his coworker not to tell his girl about the messages. Not by the man who read my letter in 45 seconds and said thanks before diving back into his phone. He didn't notice I was leaving, but I did. I noticed every time I smiled and he didn't smile back. I noticed when he stopped touching me without me asking for it. I noticed when he stopped listening to my stories halfway through. I noticed when I started feeling lonelier with him than I ever did alone. And that noticing, that's what saved me. That's what carried me, box by box, back to myself. The first morning I woke up in my new apartment, I was disoriented. It wasn't just the new walls or the unfamiliar smell of fresh paint and untouched cabinets, it was the silence. But not the kind I'd gotten used to. This silence didn't sting. It didn't carry weight. It didn't feel like a punishment. It felt like space. Room to breathe, room to remember myself. I got out of bed without tiptoeing around anyone's sleep. Made coffee and left the spoon in the sink because no one would roll their eyes about mess. Sat on the floor with my cup, legs crossed, windows open, letting the morning air in. And for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel like I was waiting for anything. Not a text, not an apology, not permission to feel how I felt. I was just here, and it was enough. I wish I could say I never missed him. That would be cleaner, simpler. But the truth is, I did. I missed the version of him I fell in love with. The boy who used to tuck my hair behind my ears, who made me playlists for car rides, who once walked 20 minutes in the rain just to bring me my favorite Thai noodles. I missed that boy, but that boy was gone long before I left. And the man he became, he didn't know how to love me anymore. He didn't want to. Maybe he didn't know how to say that out loud. So he said it in all the ways that didn't require words. In the way he didn't look up from his phone when I walked in the room. In the way he stopped touching me, then acted like I was needy when I noticed. In the way he said, "Love you," like a placeholder, something to shut down the silence instead of soften it. And I accepted it for a while, because sometimes love convinces you that endurance is the proof of its strength. But it's not. Endurance is often the mask we wear when we're afraid to admit that something has already ended. I nearly stayed. I almost talked myself out of leaving more times than I'll admit. I almost unpacked the first box after I packed it. I almost handed him the tablet with the texts and asked him to explain. I almost begged for what I deserved. But in the end, I didn't, because I remembered that letter. The one I wrote with shaky hands and an open heart. The one I folded 4 times, carefully. The one he read in less than a minute and said thanks to without ever looking me in the eyes. That moment, it became the mirror I needed. It showed me the gap between what I gave and what I received, between what I hoped for and what I actually had. And once I saw it clearly, I couldn't unsee it. That letter wasn't just a gesture of love. It was my last attempt at being heard. And when he responded with silence, it answered everything I'd been afraid to ask. So I let go, not in anger, not in spite. Not because I wanted to teach him a lesson. I let go because I couldn't carry both of us anymore. I loved him, but I loved myself more. And loving myself meant leaving the table when I realized I was the only one bringing anything to it. Now when people ask what happened, I don't go into detail. I don't talk about the letter or the layoff or the boxes. I just say, we grew apart. And that's the truth. I grew toward myself, he stayed the same. And the distance became the answer. Some days are still heavy. There are songs I skip. Restaurants I avoid, little inside jokes I wish I could forget faster, but none of it makes me regret leaving. If anything, it reminds me what I survived, what I gave, what I walked away from, not because I stopped loving him, but because I finally started loving me. I don't need closure from him. I gave it to myself, in the form of packed boxes, quiet exits, and a whisper that turned into a voice. Leave. You've already stayed long enough, and so I did. Thank you for watching. Please do not forget to like, comment, share, and subscribe. I love you all.